In the introductory video, we explained that we're looking at a slower lane of traffic with an empty or quicker lane of traffic next to it, immediately adjacent to that, and how there's always the risk of someone pulling out from that slower lane into the quicker lane. And so this animation demonstrates that. We've got the green vehicle here and Mr. Bad Guy in the red vehicle, and he pulls out into what he thinks is an empty lane, doesn't bother really to check, and crosses into the path of the green vehicle with the resultant collision. Real life example of this. So you can see the solid, slower moving lane of traffic just to the right, camera in the empty, quicker lane of traffic. And as we can always expect, you'll have those who pull into the quicker lane. Now, don't be fooled by the solid white line, because people don't always obey the rules of the road. And so you'll find that there are those who will go ahead and just pull into this lane. So as we progress the video, you'll see that that is the case. If I just stop it here, car a little bit in the distance, pulls into the quicker lane, and our vehicle behind him thinking he can do the same. So seeing the vehicle pull out into this lane, thinks it's clear to go ahead, probably doesn't even bother to check, just assumes that it's safe to go, maybe at the last moment now sees the camera and now just freezes in the lane. No idea why the driver had done this, but because of this, the camera, traveling at the speed that it is, cannot slow down or stop in time, with the resultant collision. This animation, much the same thing, the difference being that the speed of the green vehicle is a lot higher. And so I've included this animation because of the speed differential. Now, speed differential is the difference in speed between one vehicle and another. So in the previous animation, we had the green vehicle traveling in this lane, but a lot slower. The danger with a higher speed differential, so in other words, a greater speed between the green vehicle and the other slower moving traffic, is that there's less time to be able to plan an escape route, or if a driver pulls out, the driver of the green vehicle then doesn't have much time or tolerance in which to accommodate this arising situation. And so a lot more dangerous, aside from the speed of the impact. It's just that when there's a greater speed differential, it doesn't allow you that time to be able to react or respond to the situation. So that's demonstrated here. So much higher impact. So the lesson is that when we find ourselves in a situation where we have a slower moving lane of traffic, always make sure that you're traveling at not much of a greater speed relative to that slower moving lane of traffic. We don't want to have such a high speed differential, but a slower speed differential, so that if somebody does pull out, we've got the time to be able to plan and respond accordingly. Now, I've included this real life clip, not because there's a slow lane of traffic here. The van is traveling slower, but why I've included this is just to illustrate this point about speed differential. So you'll see a couple of things in this clip. The driver of the van pulls into the emptier lane. No idea why he's done that. There's no reason for that. He doesn't have any slower moving traffic ahead of him, but suddenly decides to pull into this lane. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is that you'll see that the driver indicates at the same time that he actually now starts pulling into the lane. So this is going to be repeated a number of times in the various clips, where the drivers indicate at the same time they actually make the maneuver. So the lesson here is never to do that. When you're wanting to make a turn or cross into a different lane, always signal your intentions and do so well before the time. So in other words, you first signal, let your signal or your turning indicator run for a little while, and then you make your move. Never do the same in signaling and turning at the same time. should never be simultaneous. There should always be a lag between indicating and actually carrying out the maneuver. So have a look, you'll see he indicates and then he turns at the same time. Indicates, comes into the lane. Right, so that's the one point, is just to decrease the speed differential. But the other danger here is, notice the camera in the opposing lane, the solid line of traffic. And so this is extremely dangerous, because should one of these drivers be impatient and want to pull out into this empty lane, it would put the camera in this precarious situation of now facing a head-on collision. So if you, in a situation such as this, it would be better to travel in the right-hand lane, further from this lane of oncoming traffic, so that if a driver does pull out, at least you're not in the danger zone. We have this other lane between yourself traveling in the right-hand lane and this oncoming lane of traffic. So never travel at a high speed in a lane such as this facing oncoming traffic. Try and separate yourself and create a bit of a buffer zone. So this animation's a bit of a variation on the theme. Notice now that the green vehicle is not in the open lane, but is in the same lane as the slower moving vehicles. Now approaches the slower moving vehicles and decides then to pull out into the quicker lane. Now the danger here is that any of these drivers may have looked in their rear view mirrors, preparing now to pull out into this open lane, and not seeing any vehicles coming up in this lane. So they would have checked their rear view mirrors, seen that it's clear, and then pulled out. In the meantime, we have the green vehicle suddenly pulling out into the lane. The red driver at this point would have thought there are no approaching vehicles, because he didn't see anything when he checked his rear view mirror. The green vehicle being in this lane was now hidden from his view, so he couldn't see this vehicle maybe approaching at a bit more of a speed, and so pulls out with the resultant collision. So be careful of that. When you're moving or crossing over lanes, make sure, once again, that the speed differential is not that high, but also that you pull into the lane well before the time, so that any of these vehicles will see you as part of that approaching traffic. Not suddenly make the maneuver once you reach the car at the back of the queue. Here we have an example of that. The camera's in this middle lane, as slow moving traffic both in that lane and this lane, and so it decides to cross multiple lanes to get into the quicker lane of traffic. Now this vehicle, you can see as we progress the video, is waiting for this vehicle to come past. Once this vehicle is passed, you would have noticed that there are no vehicles in this lane, thinks it's clear to go across, and then connects with the camera. All right, so just to highlight that point, and I'm just going to go back a moment, it would have been better had the camera come into this lane a lot earlier, so that the drivers would have seen him approaching in this lane, not to cross the lane just suddenly, where his visibility is obscured by these other vehicles, but also to slow down so that his speed differential is not that high. I've included this video because wherever you're on the outside of a curve, you're always less visible to the traffic ahead, as opposed to being on the inside of the curve, as this vehicle is. So in other words, this vehicle would be more noticeable to the drivers ahead than what the camera's vehicle is on the outside of the curve. And likewise, the camera was behind this vehicle, decided to suddenly come across to this lane, to move into the faster lane, and so the vehicle, not noticing it, now moves across into this lane. But what I want to point out as well is you'll notice that the driver of this vehicle indicates at exactly the same time as he decides to move across. Indicates, and now it's already moving across. So to repeat the point, and I'm going to keep repeating this point to try and draw the point home, never indicate at the same time you actually carry out the maneuver. You need to signal your intention first, let your signal run for a little while, and then only do you make the maneuver once you've established that it's clear to do so. Right, so this is a bit of an interesting clip. We have this driver who's wanting to move into the middle lane because he has slower traffic ahead of him. Now he's doing the right thing. He's indicating, he's acting with caution, but the danger, or where he comes short, is that he's keeping an eye on this traffic here, which is creeping around the corner. And so before moving into this lane, he's trying to establish whether any of these vehicles is going to progress across to the middle lane. So he's cautious and aware of that, but in being sort of enticed to take note of these vehicles here, he actually fails to take note of the camera coming along in the middle lane. So we'll just progress it slightly. So indicating, waiting cautiously to see what this vehicle is going to do, see whether it's going to come into the middle lane, sees that it doesn't and sticks to the right-hand lane, now establishes that it's clear to move into the middle lane, but hasn't taken note of the camera, and so there's collision. Now I just want to go back here as well, because from the camera's perspective, you would have easily been able to see this vehicle wanting to move into the middle lane. The driver had signaled his intention well ahead of the time, so the camera could have been a lot more considerate and actually just given him a bit of a gap, and then we wouldn't have this incident that occurred. Just hung back a little bit, allowed him that space to move into the lane, and both could have gone along happily. But instead, tries to force his way across. So this clip I've included for a couple of reasons. Once again, we've got the slower moving traffic over here, faster lane on the left-hand side. But there are two things to take note of. Firstly, the wet conditions. So the road surface is wet, so that makes it more difficult to slow down. So the speed differential is not that easy to control because of the wet conditions. In addition to that, this is also heading to a downhill. So to try and slow down, you're actually working against gravity as well. And so you're not able to cut down that speed differential as quickly under these circumstances. Now this truck in the slower lane, so he's got slower traffic ahead of him, he decides to pull out into the quicker lane. But the same thing, notice that he indicates at the very same time that he actually makes the maneuver to pull out into the lane. So indicates, and there he's already moving across, and so the camera doesn't have time to respond, especially under these road conditions. In this particular clip, we've got a taxi over here. Now, as soon as you see a taxi, already you need to be more on the alert. Why? Because taxis are in a bit of a rush because their income and livelihood depends on how many passengers they can transport throughout the day. And so they're more liable to act rashly in order to try and quickly cut across the traffic, get ahead, try and beat the traffic. But in a scenario such as this, although it doesn't happen in this clip, but where you've got a taxi in this lane and needs to pick up a passenger, maybe hailing him from the side of the road here, he's going to quickly want to cut across in order to stop and pick up that pedestrian as a passenger. That's not the case here, but what we do see is that he crosses over the solid white line because he's got slower traffic ahead of him into the path of the camera, doesn't indicate, just decides to go ahead. So being a taxi, he's wanting to try and gain whatever advantage he can in order to speed up either delivery of a passenger that he does have, and oftentimes they've got these passengers who need to get to a certain destination in a rush, and so they're forced to have to try and move a lot quicker, or simply to try and be able to maximize his time, not waste his time in slower moving traffic. So we've got to be careful wherever we see a taxi. Right, so this is an important clip because what we have over here is a slower moving vehicle. Now, when I run the video, you'll see that this vehicle is traveling far too slow for the prevailing traffic around it. So no idea why this vehicle is traveling so slow. But the point of the video clip is that we have now a truck coming up behind this slower vehicle. Now, a truck, because of its load and its size and its weight, has a lot more momentum. So the truck drivers don't want to slow down unnecessarily because it just means a lot more effort and time to try and get back up to speed again. So because of the inertia of the weight, to try and accelerate and get up to speed again is a lot more hassle for a truck driver, especially if the truck is heavily loaded. So truck drivers want to try and keep an even speed. And so because of that, it's more than likely going to want to pull out from behind this vehicle into the open lane here. So if you have that knowledge and awareness as a driver, then you'd realize that that is going to be what takes place over here. So you already build up that anticipation, and you could hang back to allow this truck driver the space to actually move into the empty lane here. But if you're oblivious to that, then you're going to forge ahead and suffer the consequences. If I run the clip, fortunately, the camera's a little bit aware of that, and so it pulls to the side, a little bit of an escape route on the side of the road here. So there's no contact between his vehicle and the truck, but could easily have been the case had he not had this bit of an escape route here, and so the truck progresses on. So here we've got trucks again, but what this clip is to demonstrate is that the truck that's in the rear here faces a slower moving truck ahead of him. And so once again, not wanting to slow down on whatever speed or momentum he's built up, now pulls out into this lane, the faster moving lane, although he doesn't have the space to do that. And so actually forces the camera out of the way, as we'll see when we progress the video. But the other point to highlight is once again the indicator. So the indicator at the same time that he actually makes the maneuver. There we go, indicating moving across. And fortunately for the camera, there is this escape route to the side. He's quite aware and so moves across into this lane and avoids any collision with the truck. But you'll find that where there are trucks, one behind the other, and the truck that's behind is traveling faster, the drivers don't want to slow down. So they'll take that chance, and you, as a car, smaller vehicle, you're going to come off second best, so they're willing to take that risk. So just be careful of this scenario. In this animation, what it's demonstrating, once again, slow moving lane of traffic. We've got the green vehicle approaching the slower moving traffic to bypass that. But yeah, we've got Mr. Speedy in a fancy sports car coming at a quicker speed than what the green vehicle is, and tries to actually squeeze through the gap as he approaches this slower moving vehicle at the back. And the green vehicle, as it approaches, tries to squeeze between that gap, but actually makes collisions. So oftentimes on the road, in this particular scenario, we find that not everybody has the same level of skill when it comes to judging speed and distance. And so people will miscalculate the buffer or the space they have in order to carry out such a maneuver. If I just run the animation, we see that that's what happens here. It tries to take the gap, but not enough of a gap, and so there's that contact. Real life example of this, so we'll see the vehicle coming down the right hand side of the camera, approaches the slower moving vehicle ahead of it, but miscalculates the timing and the distance of the gap, and so actually collides with the camera. And once again, notice the indicator in fact went on even after he started turning. And now I don't know why people think they can just indicate and then turn. I don't know if they think that by putting on your indicator it gives you the right to turn, but that's not the case. You're only allowed to turn when it's free to do so. It doesn't matter whether your indicator is on or how long it's been on. Anyway, this driver goes ahead and there's that collision. In this animation, a little bit of a variation on what we've seen already. Green vehicle coming up behind the slower moving traffic. But what I wanted to demonstrate here is Mr. Speedy in his fancy car in the slower lane, and so wanting to pull out into the faster lane. So where you see a fancy car, a sports car, know that people have bought these cars not because they want to sit in slower traffic. They like to speed along. That's why they've spent all the money on the fancy car. And so whenever you come across such a sports car, be aware that these are drivers who want to speed. They want to take risks. And so we've got to act with even more caution. Progress the animation, and you see the driver pulling out then. So yeah, we've got a real life clip. Mr. Fancy Car in front here. And as we progress the video, he has a slower moving vehicle ahead of him. And so not wanting to waste all his money on his fancy car sitting in slower traffic, decides to pull out, but doesn't take note of the oncoming traffic. And so quite an incident. In this particular clip, what we have here is this darker vehicle, this black vehicle, and what he's actually doing is he's brake checking the silver vehicle behind him. So maybe some incident a little bit further down the road, and so he's trying to give the driver of the silver vehicle a lesson. So brake checking him. They're traveling a lot slower in the lane here. So as the camera comes past, you see that this driver is obviously frustrated with the driver ahead of him, brake checking him. He's focusing on this whole situation, decides to quickly pull out, but fails to take note of the camera's vehicle. He brake checking, frustrated, decides to pull out. Here again, we probably had a bit of an altercation. So the driver, and this is the driver of the vehicle in front of this vehicle, has climbed out. He's wanting to come to the back to take a photograph of the license plate. So the driver, who's still in this vehicle, panics to an extent and decides he's going to get away quickly before he can take a picture of his license plate, and rashly pulls out into the moving traffic. Right, in the animation, once again, slow moving vehicle. And where you find that it's either a bus or a truck, then know that any vehicles behind that bus or truck would not want to sit behind the larger vehicle because their visibility is now restricted. So it's not as safe to travel behind such a larger vehicle, and not wanting to slow down would no doubt want to move into the faster lane. So that is what's depicted over here. The driver of the green vehicle should be aware of that, the fact that a driver won't want to sit behind such a truck. So anticipate that this driver is going to want to pull out into the lane, but doesn't do so, doesn't allow that gap, and so there's the collision. So had this driver just been a little bit more aware, he would have allowed the driver of the red vehicle the space to actually move across. So in this case, not Mr. Good Guy, but also Mr. Bad Guy. A real life example of this, a larger vehicle ahead, moving slower, so the driver of the pickup truck, not wanting to get stuck behind it, now moves into the camera's lane. And the camera at this point could have just held back slightly, knowing that he'd probably want to move into the lane, allow him the space to do so, be courteous on the roads, and you'll find that the other drivers actually appreciate that. But if you don't allow them that space, then it can result in quite a negative situation. Fortunately, no contact there. Right, so here we've got a real life clip. As we progress it, just going to stop it at this point. You'll see that this driver suddenly pulls out into the left lane here, and the driver of the black vehicle actually overreacts, overcorrects in order to try and avoid this vehicle, and actually lands up in a far worse situation than simply braking and allowing space for this vehicle to come across. I noticed that the driver of the silver vehicle, same story, indicated at exactly the same time that he carried out the maneuver. Didn't indicate his intentions first, and then afterwards, when it was safe to do, then move into the lane. No, indicates and moves away across into the lane straight away. You can see this vehicle has crashed into the middle barrier, and had he only just put on brakes, I would have been far better off. please like, subscribe, and get notified.